You know that feeling? Like you're just moving through life, going from one thing to the next, but you can't quite see the bigger picture? What if there was a hidden map to your own life, a way to see how all the pieces actually connect? Well, we're going to dive right into that idea. We're going to follow one person's journey to find that exact map, and it all kicked off with a trip back home to Fuzhou, China.
So he goes back to the city where he'd spent the first 20 years of his life. And while he's there, he starts rereading his own autobiography, one he wrote a decade ago. But being surrounded by all those familiar sights and sounds, well, this wasn't just a trip down memory lane. It sparked a much, much deeper question.
And right there, that's the question at the very heart of this. Can we actually look back at the beautiful chaos of our own lives, all the jobs, the hobbies, the moves, the relationships, and find some kind of hidden logic, a repeating structure? Let's follow his quest to decode his own life and see what he discovered.
Okay, so the first step was a big one. He had to stop seeing his life as just this straight line of events. Instead, he started to see it as being organized into these distinct stages, or what he calls forms, each one with its own unique structure, its own logic.
And these forms, there's so much more than just, life stages or a new address. Hometown isn't just a place, it's that feeling of being totally rooted somewhere. Alien land is that moment in adolescence when your world suddenly gets bigger. Domain is when you go all in on a profession. You see, each one is a fundamental shift in how your life is organized.
To really get that first form, hometown, he tells this great story about his father's maps. See, his dad's whole world was defined by the cities on those maps, and for him as a little boy, that cabinet basically held the entire world. It's a perfect way to show a key idea. Our world starts out small, but it holds all the seeds for where we'll go next. Those maps were a kind of thematic object that passed from his father's world into his own.
So, as he's looking closer at all these life forms, this really powerful repeating pattern just jumps out at him. In every single stage of his life, he found this dual center structure. There was always a surviving center, the stuff you have to do, and then there was a thriving center, and that's the stuff that makes you come alive, the spaces where you really truly grow.
And check this out. You can see exactly how this pattern holds up. In his childhood, home and family was about survival. But this old, abandoned academy, that was for imagination, for thriving. Later in adolescence, his classes were the necessity, but the poetry society was where the real passion was. Then in his early career, agency work paid the bills. But his personal study into something called corporate identity, that's what fueled his growth. The big takeaway here is that even when the details of your life change, this underlying structure can be a really consistent map.
Now, this model isn't set in stone. As life gets more complicated, especially when you're adapting to a totally new place, that dual center structure evolves. You get continuous centers, where you keep using your old skills, and native centers that just kind of pop up organically in the new environment. And even deeper, you start to develop reflective centers for making sense of the past and constructive centers for building new ideas for the future.
So this is where the journey gets really fascinating. He realized that these patterns, they weren't just about his own life. No, they were pointing to a universal model for understanding any creative life. This was the big aha moment.
He came up with this core concept, the world of activity. Think of it as the total container for your life's work, everything, paid and unpaid, personal and professional. It's not just your job, it's the whole shebang, from your daydreams to your most concrete projects.
And inside this world, there's this really natural progression. It all starts with flow, just the chaotic day-to-day stream of experiences. Then, out of that chaos, we develop a focus on certain themes. That focus can then harden into a stable center, like a big project or a deep interest. And finally, our centers can link up with other people's to form a circle, a real community. It's an amazing way to see how we create meaning out of the randomness of life.
Okay, so that's the theory. Pretty cool, right? But how does this become something we can actually use? This is where we shift from just explaining it to actually applying it.
And here's what's so important to get. This isn't just some interesting academic idea. He calls it a method of life. It's a toolkit for looking at yourself, for understanding your own journey, and for being way more intentional about where you put your energy.
So let's make this real for a second. Think about your life, right now. What's your surviving center? The job, the bills, the responsibilities that keep the lights on? And then, and this is the big one, what's your thriving center? Where are you really growing and playing and feeling totally alive? Just being able to name both is the first step to designing your own world of activity on purpose.
To wrap all of this up, we're going to end with a really personal story that just beautifully ties this whole framework together. It shows how these ideas can stretch across time and even across generations.
Okay, so get this. Years and years ago, when he was 19 and totally unsure about his future, he wrote a bunch of poems about chess pieces. Fast forward to recently, and his own young son gets super into chess. So he digs up those 32-year-old poems, uses AI to translate them from Chinese to English, and makes a calendar out of them as a Christmas gift for his boy.
There's this one line in the poem that's just so perfect. Pawn, I know your thoughts, awaiting transformation. I mean, wow. It captures exactly how he felt as a young man, and it connects directly to the journey of growth and potential that everyone, including his son, is on. That book of poems became a thematic object, just like his father's maps, carrying meaning across decades.
And this brings us to this beautiful concept he calls generative anticipation. That gift wasn't just about looking back. It was an act that generated new meaning, new possibilities for his son. It shows how our worlds of activity don't just stop with us. They get passed on, and they influence and shape the worlds of other people.
He calls these personal legacies thematic enterprises. And even a small act, like sharing some old poems, can create what he calls a tiny culture, this small but totally unforgettable pocket of shared meaning between a father and a son. It's just a powerful reminder that we are all creating culture every single day in ways big and small.
And so that leaves us with one final question to think about. When you look at the map of your life, at your own surviving and thriving centers, your own themes and projects, what's the tiny culture that you're building? What are the ideas, the passions, the stories that you're going to pass on as your legacy to the next generation?